All right, Facebook is online.
Hell yeah.
Wither YouTube.
I like that.
Come on, YouTube. You can do it.
Oh, I'm getting a notification. Here we are.
Dun dun dun.
Whoop.
Oh,
There
that's
you
me.
are. There you are talking.
Well, it would
Man,
not be an
up to
episode of King Pilled if we weren't starting 15 or 20 minutes late.
this one's my fault, fans.
Well,
I'm doing the
partial. This
Colin
this
Quinn
was
thing.
this was a joint effort. It was my fault, your
Um,
fault, and the streaming software's fault.
God, why do my lips look so juicy and magenta? Damn. It's not all that hair to hide them.
Juicy lipped liberal Steve.
Yeah, I like that.
I bet you do.
Growing up, my mom called me a thin-lipped dickhead. So
Did she really?
no, I don't. I mean, probably. She said some really like horrific, not horrific, but like just mean for the sake of being funny. She said some like real mean stuff. It was pretty good. So just like whatever it was, within the past like few years, in front of somebody else, she said something, and then just like with wide-eyed exuberance, pointed and goes, "Look at his face," because like she's still even like I don't know. It's just something about like she's my mom, so like I still like even if I know she's like messing with me, it's just like mother, there's still that. So she I don't know. She always make jokes about me being adopted or something. It was pretty fucking funny. Yeah.
I remember when we first started doing these together. You said something about me looking like your father's true son or something like that.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Mama
Oh
Messina
Lord.
is an absolute treasure. Steven has told me stories, and I'm just going to leave it at that. I'll let her I'll let her wonder what it is. What's up, folks? We're gonna give it another couple minutes here. Let people get on in here. Do us a favor and like the stream and share it, and throw us a
Yeah.
little comment down here in the chat. Let us know if you can hear us okay, and let us know that you are here. Most likely, I will be a little more. I don't know about Steven, but I'll be a little more lower energy today than usual. I'm just kind of feeling worn down, and right now we're doing the cross our fingers and hope that I don't have the COVID. Because Jason Stapleton, whose house I was at over this last weekend, got a positive test day before yesterday, I think, and it's funny. I felt absolutely fantastic. Had all the energy in the world. Was doing great yesterday morning, and I got a message from him that he tested positive, and like within half an hour, suddenly I was like,
That's
man,
funny.
I don't know if I feel that great. So
Makes you wonder.
so I'm well aware of the power of my own mind. So I would not at all be surprised if I'm just kind of feeling cruddy because my body is anticipating that I'm going to feel cruddy. So I'm doing everything. I'm basically acting like I do have it and just bombing all the vitamins and minerals and everything else. I ordered some quercetin or whatever it's called to be delivered today, and I'm just gonna act like I have it and then hope that I don't. I think that probably I don't. I don't have a fever. I don't have anything like that. So I just feel I'm a little congested and then kind of feel like someone was been beating on my legs with a hammer. So
You get some hydroxychloroquine.
not
Take one of
yet.
those phony ass tests. See what the deal is.
See, that's the thing. I definitely do not want to take a test. I do not feel like having my brain membrane scratched with a Q-tip.
There's
That's
alternatives now.
what kind? Anal?
No, you know what kind.
Yeah, that's not my jam.
No.
No.
Yeah.
Although
You'll get there.
that is an absolutely epic like foreign policy own by China. I
Oh,
have to I
yeah.
have to tip my cap a little bit to them that they actually persuaded American bureaucrats to bend over and take a Q-tip up the keister to see if they have a respiratory disease. And they did it, and they did it for like a few weeks or something, and then they came out and said, "Oh, sorry, that was an accident. We weren't supposed to do
The old
that. My
whoopsie.
bad."
The old whoopsie doodle. Yeah. Hey, we've all been there.
Whoops, we got your face and your butthole mixed up. Well, we won't do that next time. Sorry.
He's like, well, we get all of you mixed up with each other, so I guess that. I'm just kidding.
There we go. There's our first attempt at getting this channel taken down. What's up, Buck?
Well, look, we've got 174 subscribers on YouTube. I don't think that the counter can go much beyond that, right? I mean, what do you do once you start, inching towards 200? I mean, the system isn't set up to deal with that kind of volume, I imagine, in terms of subscribership, right?
Right. This is we're setting records.
Our days are numbered.
Yeah. Buck said that he had COVID. This is Buck Johnson of Counterflow, who I did an interview with him a couple days ago, and that'll be going live. They don't want anybody to know about Buck.
Does that help block out the train or not really?
No, not at all.
Nah, fuck. Yeah, well, you guys should test each other next time you guys hang out.
What do you mean?
Let's test each other for COVID.
Oh, yeah.
Practice.
Yeah. Yeah, let's not say we did, or let's not even say we did. Let's just not. Buck said he had it, and his first clue was muscle pain. Then he lost taste and smell. So that's what I've been testing. I keep checking to see if I have a fever, and I've been checking to see if I can still taste things. And I just ate a burger over here, and I could taste it just fine. So we're going to continue crossing our fingers and find out what happens. But anyways, okay, we've been going for a little over 5 minutes here, so we'll get started. For those of you who are new, this is our show King Pilled. I am the host. That's the other host. And his name is Liberal Steve. I'm Matt. And you can follow us on Twitter after you subscribe to to our YouTube channel here. And at some point here, we'll have this out on a podcast on iTunes and everything else. So when you're listening, and we'll upload these episodes there. So when you're listening there, then do us a favor and subscribe there as well. And then you can follow me on Twitter at Real King Pilled and Steven at Messina Inc. And that's kind of where, for now, that's where we're doing the bulk of our shit posting and everything else. We're going to be working on creating something like a Patreon or something like that. And we've got some pretty cool ideas for some behind the scenes content that we're going to do. So I mentioned last time in our last episode on Monday that one thing we want to start doing is doing read-throughs of Mencius Moldbug. Because right now, if you're like me and you're a better auditory learner than visual, then if you want to listen to Moldbug stuff, there's very few options for you, and most of them are kind of crummy. They're difficult to understand. It's like screen reading software or something like that. So I want to provide this service to the world. I want to get some of these read. And then we'll just, I'm conceited enough that I can't just leave it to his words. I have to kind of inject my own takes as well. And I assume Steven will want to as well. So we're going to start doing that, where it'll be a separate segment from our main shows. We'll just record different pieces by Moldbug. Some of it I think is going to be paywalled. We're going to figure out a way to do that, but we'll let you know what the details are of that when we get around to it. What's up, Carlos? Amy says Amy, my wife, is making a dish with a bunch of Indian spices, cayenne, lemon, and a whole head of garlic to test Matt's sense of taste and smell. It's this butter chicken recipe that is just ungodly good. But anyways, okay. So let's get into the content for today. What I called this episode is Why Separation of Church and State is a Trap. And part of this is intended to be a response from apparently a new fan. A friend of ours in a Facebook group that shall not be named said that he'd shared one of our episodes about the shadowy cabal. He'd shared that with some friends, and one of them made a comment in that episode about that episode. And I'll read that comment here, and then we'll proceed to respond. So he said, speaking of me, he said, while leaning on the inevitability of returning to rule by one, he, being me, says a state church is also inevitable. He's saying the state will inevitably create a church. Maybe if he flipped that relationship. He knows why the state would create a church, meaning he knows what function a church will provide. Maybe if he put aside this chain of causality, and just as hypothetical began with creation of church first. He knows how once created the church will function, knows its role, but perhaps if he explored how a church comes into existence organically rather than by fiat, he would have an entry path into ideas not found in Moldbug. And then he said, tell him to figure out what nominalism was historically and what its implications are for language overall. Nominalism, I know absolutely nothing about. So if you have, if either our friend who posted this or his friend's friend. If you guys want to send me some stuff to read where I can educate myself a little more on that, then I'm happy to. But I'll address the rest of the comment there. And actually, in that episode, in the timestamp part he mentioned, I actually did flip the relationship as well. What I said was that the state will inevitably create a church, and that every church will inevitably create a state. That the two are inextricable from each other, and that's based on something that I've asserted in the past, where I've said that politics and religion are the same thing. They occupy the same space in the human psyche. And so that's what I wanted to get into today. So I think the first thing that I'll address is this idea of secular versus religious. I'm in the middle of reading this book by Tom Holland called Dominion, and I'd heard really, really good things about it for a long time, and it has been absolutely phenomenal, and I would strongly, strongly recommend it to anybody else. What he does is he takes a historical look at basically the development of Western culture by tracing the story of the development of the Christian church. And he starts by laying the groundwork for kind of the cultural climate of the rest of the world and the cultures immediately around just before the birth of Christ. So the Persians and the Romans and the Greeks, and their relationships to their gods and the way that they saw the world based on the gods that they worshipped, and how the Christian worldview kind of came crashing in to that time frame and was very, very different. And it gives you a really good appreciation for the nature of Christianity and the story of the gospel and everything when you understand the cultural context into which those stories were written down, and the context of the people that were listening to Jesus when he was talking. Because it's interesting, if you sit and listen to someone talking culturally, say 50 years ago, and they use different words, and then you take those same phrases and you put them out into the world now, they're often gonna have different meanings, and that meaning isn't necessarily going to be easy to capture. There's easy ones like gay, like is an easy word that has completely different connotations. Now that's a kind of really obvious one because those connotations are so distinctly different. But there's an aspect of language that's very impressionistic kind of. And so if you go back and you read old stories and you take your modern perspective and you interpret the words of the stories from your modern perspective, and you try to flesh out your existing worldview, you're not going to be taking the same perspective on those stories as if you were a person back then who didn't have I was going to say the privilege, but it's not necessarily a privilege. It's just they didn't have the history that we have. So I was having a conversation with someone on Facebook this morning, and Stephen and I were talking to him. We were discussing monarchy, and this is a subject we want to go into in a little more detail later on, as part of reading through Yarvin's stuff. But one thing that I said, he was kind of struggling with the idea of monarchy and the kind of the dangers of it, and how it just seems like you're giving a lot of power to one person, et cetera, et cetera. And one thing that I said is that we are so steeped in the culture of liberalism that we don't even realize that we are. So it's like the adage of the or the little story or joke of the fish that was swimming along, and another fish swam up to him, and he said, "Boy, the water sure is warm today." And the other fish goes, "What's water?" That's kind of how we are to liberalism. Liberalism is it's the basis for our worldview. And so we interpret everything through that without even necessarily realizing that's the lens that we have on. And so when I told this guy talking about monarchy, I said, when you hear monarchy, what you are doing is you're hearing the liberal definition of monarchy. And here I'm using liberal as the technical term, not the like modern pejorative or whatever. I mean, I would see it as a pejorative, but you have the liberal Western understanding of monarchy. And liberal Western governments evolved like directly as a repudiation or a departure from monarchy. So you just by nature of having been born when you were and growing up when you did, you naturally have a colored perspective on what monarchy means. So just the same, when Jesus said specific things to the Jews and then to the early Christian church, when Jesus and Paul and the various apostles, when they said specific things to them, they were speaking to them in a context that where their words meant different things to those people than those words mean to us now. And so that's kind of what Tom Holland does in the book Dominion is he starts off laying the groundwork for what the average person living in Bethlehem or in Judea or whatever at that time would have, how they would have viewed the world. There's another really interesting book that goes into the like the metaphysical assumptions of the early Christian church. It's called it's by Michael Heiser, I think, and it's called The Unseen Realm. And I've only gotten a little ways into it. I need to finish it, but it's very interesting. Like our modern Western conception of the world that the Jews lived in, the Jews around the time of Christ, and the way that they saw the world, it's completely different. We have no idea what assumptions and stuff that they made. But that's not really the purpose of this show today. Maybe we'll go into that in a future episode. What I'm getting at here is that when you start with the worldview or the perspective on reality that the people around the time of Christ had, and then you start layering the Christian story on top of that, you wind up with a different picture of the world than if you start with the view of reality that we have now and go back and read the Christian story and you're building on a completely different foundation. And there's what you realize as you go through this book Dominion by Tom Holland, what you realize is that the liberal secular worldview that we have today, that American pop culture is built upon, is itself Christian. It's fundamentally Christian. It's built on the Christian presuppositions. So when you take your current Western 21st century view of the world and go back and attempt to understand the gospel and the story of the early Christian church and whatever the Bible says, all these different things, when you're doing that, there's a circular thing happening here where you are actually studying your own foundation, even if you don't realize it. And so one really interesting point is that the term secular is itself a Christian concept. It was from, we talked the other day about the fourth turning, and in the fourth turning, they have let me find this Wikipedia here real quick. The Strauss-Howe generational theory, they break up time in what they call saeculums. And for them, it's spelled like Saeculum, I think, like that. Yeah. And so saeculum just means like era or age, like the age of this time or the age of that time. And that's actually the same word where you get the term secular. So secular evolved, was a term that was coined by Christian thinkers who were attempting to try to make a distinction between the matters of the church, the matters of religion, which had to do with customs and rituals, and the things of the rest of the world, or the rest of life. So there's the things that were religious and then the things that were non-religious. So the term secular is itself a product of a Christian worldview or a Christian perspective. And so then atheism is effectively just kind of a worship of the secular. It places the secular above the religious. So in a funny sense, then atheism is actually a branch of Christianity. The atheism that we encounter today, the most atheists that you encounter today they'll espouse Western values, but those Western values were derived from Christianity. They didn't get to that atheist without having been filtered through the minds of Christians first. So what does this have to do with separation of church and state? I've asserted before that politics and religion are two sides of the same coin. The reason for that is both of them concern themselves with metaphysical highest values. In the process of governing, ultimately, you're making decisions. People who govern are making decisions, and when they're making decisions, they're expressing value judgments. And if you start digging into why they have those value judgments, why they're making those decisions, eventually you get to God. You get to whatever their God is. So religion's not a phenomenon that people either participate in or don't participate in. Everyone is religious. Religion is a fundamental constituent of the human psyche. And it's a matter of how it's expressed and what the nature of a particular religion is. So whenever you get involved in politics, you start asking questions like, should we do this or should we do that? As soon as you incorporate the concept of should, you're implying a right and a wrong. You're implying a highest moral value that you're pursuing. There's a right thing to do and a wrong thing to do, and you get back to this thing I talked about before, where you just kind of keep asking why. Well, we should do this. Okay, why? Well, because X, Y, Z. Okay, why? Well, because ABC. Okay, why? Just keep asking why and following it back, and eventually you're going to get into a conversation about God. So, in all of Earth's history, anybody who served the role of government, whether it was a king, whether it was a chieftain, whether it was whatever the structure of government is, they have all either been worshipped or have considered themselves appointed by God. Until we get to this Western democracy idea, and here, one of the key tenets of the Republican limited government ideas in the Constitution was there's religion and then there's secular, and we need to make sure that church and state remain separate from one another, because we believe in the fundamental the value, the divinity of the autonomous human soul, and it's not right for a government, for a king, to dictate to his subjects what their relationship to God should be. One's relationship to God is personal. That's the kind of the root of the separation of church and state idea. But that idea is itself Christian. Before Christianity, there was no concept of valuing the weak. In all human societies, it's always been what was considered holy or godlike was strength. Strength and power were associated with holiness and with godliness. It wasn't until Christianity that was flipped on its head. Christianity was the first time that the world was introduced to the idea of, the meek will inherit the earth, and that each human soul has value, has dignity, and that a ruler's responsibility is to look out for the best interests of every person. The entire notion of equality between people is a Christian concept. That notion never existed prior to the introduction of the gospel. So when people try to say that, oh, we have separated church and state, what they're missing is that idea itself is a religious notion. The idea of separating church and state is an expression of religious value. When a person engages with his government, and the government says, you harmed this person upon this basis, he's appealing to a religious concept. He's appealing to right and wrong. He's making a should judgment. And again, this comes back into religion. So politics and religion occupy the same space in the human mind. I have one big impulse of mine, or one focus of mine, and one thing that I want to try to get across to people when we're doing these shows is the necessity of engaging with the truth, or engaging with reality, and not creating a hypothetical abstract reality and then engaging with that, but actually dealing with the real reality on the ground. And for this reason, then people say, okay, well, we have that separation of church and state. Now you have your church and then you have your government, and the two are not associated with one another. And they're looking very, very closely at making sure that doesn't happen. The problem is, in order to govern someone, in order to govern a society, you have to give them you have to tap into their religion. You have to give them a God to worship. And this is why I said in the last episode that every state will create a church. Just the same, every church will ultimately create some sort of a state, because within the context of a church, if there is no state in that area, you take a whole bunch of people, plop them onto a desert island. I just got something that says that you're offline. Let me make sure that we're still streaming. Okay.
I'm here. If you can hear me.
Okay. Yeah, I can hear you.
Praise God. Speaking of religion and states, what a state of chaos we were just in. I'm sorry I didn't charge my battery.
Okay. All right. I think we're still good. Give us a shout out, folks, if you can still hear us. All right. We will wait until
the totalitarian
we make sure
libertarian is back. The most self-doubt. Good God.
Oh, someone doesn't get it. Okay. John says he hears us. Okay, cool. All right. So if you were to take a bunch of people and I like using this as a tool to think about things in this context, to take everyone and put them on or imagine people like in a tribe of 50 people or something, and how would humans organize themselves in that context? What are the instincts? When you run into a conflict, how does it get sorted out? What psychological profiles emerge through the course of people evolving through various forms of technology and that sort of thing? So if you were to take people and put them all into a desert island with no context of outside world or whatever, they exist on this desert island and it's just them. Eventually, you're going to get one person who becomes the leader. Whether that person whether it takes it by force or whether he's elected to that position. Either way, he takes power. And then going forward, the question of why is he in power, or why should we do what he said? And the answer is because. It just is. There's arbitrary. He's in power because enough people put him in that position. Well, why does that matter? It does. It just does. And this is one of the ideas when we get into reading Moldbug, when we do this series on patchwork, he addresses that. And I'll read something about that here in just a minute as kind of a teaser, but I'll finish this thought here and then I'll get you to chime in, Stephen. So you put all these people on this desert island, they create a government out of the ether. Given that religion is a fundamental constituent of the human psyche, eventually there's going to be one of two things. Either everyone is going to have the same religion, or there's going to be multiple different religions. If there's multiple different religions, then it's just a matter of time before they conflict. One person is going to have their religious ritual, and another person is going to have their religious ritual, and it's just a matter of time before they come into conflict with one another. And someone is going to be appointed the arbiter to decide who takes precedent, whose position matters more, they're going to make this value judgment between the two. And when that's done, in effect, that institutionalizes that religion. The religion that wins out is institutionalized. It sets a precedent where going forward, the values of this government reflect the values of this religion. Just the same, if you say everyone all had the same religion, well, then it's inevitable that every value distinction or every value judgment made by that government is going to reflect the values of that religion. The religion is going to express itself through the government. So this is why I say that you can't separate politics and religion. They're inseparable from one another. They're the same expression of the same thing. They're different expressions of the same thing, rather. So when we evolved this technology of separation of a church and state, what we did is we instantiated a deception. We instantiated a lie. We embedded a lie into our psyche where we said, in our culture, we have just a secular government, and then we have all these other religions. When in reality, the government was itself a reflection of a religion. And it has now become, it's a couple of years ago, you might have gotten looked at a little funny if you said that the U.S. government was being taken over by a religious cult. Now, I think a lot of people would be kind of like, "Oh yeah, I understand what you're saying." They may think that you're like saying it just as kind of an analogy, but I would say it's literally true. that we're moving more and more toward being governed explicitly by a fundamentalist radical religious cult. And a big part of this is because people still buy this idea that church and state somehow occupy separate containers in the human mind, but they don't. What we're seeing is a religion taking over the state while everyone thinks that the state is a religious. And this goes back to what I was saying about like the necessity of existing with reality, engaging with reality, and trying to align yourself with the truth. And when you start deviating from that and you start living according to a not truth, it's just a matter of time before you're gonna meet a collision with reality. It's not adaptive in the long run. But anyway, so that's kind of my thoughts on why separation of church and state is a trap. It sucked people into this into believing an impossibility that the church and state could be separate from one another. What do you think, Stephen?
Oof. Oh man, it's hard. It's hard to see. I kind of don't get how someone would say that we're not basically just a theocracy now. Um, and I don't know how immersed people are in it or not. I think it's pervasive. I thought it was just like in a progressive hell where I am here, but just the idea of the idea of saying that someone with a vagina is a woman is like now kind of like controversial. I mean, how's that? Like that's like a religious thing. I don't, I mean, like if Christians were to get shit for, oh yeah, the world was created in 7 days, how's that any more? How's that any more like ridiculous than saying, yeah, oh yeah, oh wait, whoa, you can't presume her gender. Um, she is a woman. That's a controversial statement. I don't know what explains that other than religion. I mean, it's certainly not it's not a product of science and reason, right? So what could it possibly be? I think when you're talking about years ago, describing that the U.S. was ruled um, by a religion, I think you would have got from a lot of people, yeah, tell me about it, like that kind of reaction. But now it seems pretty obvious. But I don't know. Maybe there's some people who now are just kicking into the yeah, tell me about it phase, and then it's going to become abundantly clear, in the future. Although I hope not. I hope the future is somehow becomes brighter. I don't really particularly have a total idea of a path forward just now. But yeah, it's been forever, and it was even like when Kennedy was running for president, he was a Catholic. That was a major point of concern, and it wasn't necessarily, you're dealing with, you're looking at it in Machiavellian terms. You're dealing not with like the actual issue at hand. It wasn't a matter of keeping religion out of politics. It was a matter of keeping that religion and what was associated with Catholicism at the time out of politics, and keeping, basically Protestantism firmly entrenched in the White House. So
Right.
it's always, yeah, I mean, it's a nonsense idea to talk about, the separation of church and state, other than, it's like, it's just like anything else that we're seeing today. It's just a mechanism that gets used for progressive ends.
Right. And what we're seeing now is the product of a society that has denied the mystical for however long. I don't know when it really began, but the society that was supposed to be built on logic and reason and governed by the experts, the scientists and the academics, and there was an attempt to try to, it was like a takeover by the materialists who just tried to, they basically were like, we can engineer the perfect government and we can engineer the perfect policies, and all we have to do is appropriately apply logic and reason. And they denied the existence of the mystical. The mystical was suppressed, and now it's coming back to bite everyone in the ass, because this idea of like that gender is a a construct that has no bearing, that has no connection to sexuality, is, regardless of whether it's true or false, it's a mystical notion. You're creating a mystical, um, you're creating a mystical product and then trying to sell it. And if you're trying to sell a mystical product, that's kind of a cynical definition of a religion. So what we're seeing now is a takeover of a radical religion, and you got the Weinsteins of the world who think that the answer here is we need to logic and reason things even more. Like the radical centrists who think that the problem here is that we don't have enough logic and reason. But what they don't understand is that this is the outcome of applying logic and reason and attempting to create a government from logic and reason and doing it more. If you deny the mysticism, if you deny the mystic ain't going to deny you because it's interested in you, even if you aren't interested in it. And uh, and the great irony of all of this too is that nothing has gotten me deeper into the mystical than science. It's like the deeper that you go into science, the more you realize that science is mysticism, and mysticism is scientific. All these things are there's I keep running into these scenarios where everything is just running its all these different concepts run into each other and kind of all trace back to the same place. And I think that's not an accident. Someone in the comments said that I agree, separation of church and state is impossible because you can't define one without including the other. That's that's everything that I just said for the last 30 minutes. That's it in one sentence. You can't define church or state without including the other one. And some religions are much more overt about this, like Islam and Judaism. They're overt that religion and state are the same concept effectively. So they prescribe, those religions explicitly prescribe state practices, and you can't mix those two things. You can't have this Christian idea of everyone being equal and we're all going to be under the same umbrella and we're all going to have one single state that governs people with all these different relationships to the mystic. It's a recipe for total catastrophe, and it's not an accident that that's where we're getting. There was one thing that I wanted to read here that was kind of a little teaser for the next mold bug thing that we're going to read. And I mean, you can go read all this stuff for yourself, but
can you help me figure something out real quick?
Sure.
Because I was thinking about when you're and I agree. It's like we're walking around in a fluid right now, just like the fish are swimming in water, but we don't really think of it that much. And I agree with you about the idea of liberalism. And I was thinking, to the same end, you could say the same thing about religion, maybe specifically Christianity. But then I was wondering, it's like, well, isn't like liberalism, I guess, is sort of already using that that framework?
Yes.
So maybe like I'd be saying the same thing. I'm trying to like work that out in my head. Like, would I be repeating it if I said, well, yeah, and also we're also immersed in Christianity and we don't realize it?
Yeah, I think
it's sort of a perverted version of it, maybe.
I would say liberalism is effectively a Protestant denomination,
right?
Broadly speaking, it's been influenced by other things, but I mean, Christianity was influenced by things before it as well.
Sure.
Christian doctrine was influenced by prior religious traditions. And you can go listen to read Dominion by Tom Holland, and he gets into some of that with the Council of Nicaea and everything. But yeah, when you refer to liberalism, it's very useful to just think of it as a sect of Christianity. It's just a sect of Christianity that tried to make God the individual, or tried to make the individual God, but not any individual, like the idealized archetypal individual. And so then liberal government is, which is another word for that, is democracy. This is when people use democracy. I talked about this on Counterflow with Buck. That's going to be going out next Monday. So go subscribe to Counterflow in anticipation of that. But when people use the word democracy, there's this thing among libertarians and conservatives where they like to say that oh well, what you're seeing now is actually, this is what democracy looks like when when the many suppress the few, or whatever, they, or even there's the great Ayn Rand notion that that in a democracy you can't have respect for a minority, because democracy is by definition not respect for the minority. But what you've got here is you've got a working definition of democracy. The people who are using it, the people who advocate for it, don't, if you listen to what they say, if you look at their embodied values, they're not defining democracy as majority rule necessarily. What they're defining democracy as is government. I need to come up with a pithier way of saying this, but basically government that is practiced toward the best end of the people, toward the will of the people. And then it's like, well, how do you define that? How do you define what the best end of the will of the people would be? And that's where you have to invoke experts. The experts are the ones who determine, they're the ones who have all the knowledge. They're the ones who think about all these things. So they derive what would be best for the people. And then they inform the people what would be best for them. And then the people, based on being informed, make choices. And then the government is supposed to reflect that. But this is far from majority rule. Like in practice, it ends up being a majority rule thing, but that's not what they're thinking about. When they use the word democracy, what they're describing is this, is government that's conducted in the best interests of the people, versus government at the will of the ruler, or whatever else. So government at the whim of the oligarchs. Now, it just so happens that a democratic corporate state, a clerical state, as Yarvin likes to refer to it, always winds up being expressed as basically the will of the oligarchs. It ends up being run and governed by oligarchs. But the people who believe in it, the people who have this mystical faith in democracy, what they're thinking of is an organism that is designed to purify the individual according to the idealized archetype of the individual. They've created an idealized archetype of the perfect human being, and the state is responsible for turning everyone into that idealized human archetype. And the whole notion of Christ is like the archetypal perfect human being. They've just taken Christ out and just put in like the outline of him. And then they're trying to fill it with logic and reason. So it's really just it's a modern day Tower of Babel. Liberalism is just the modern day Tower of Babel, that we're going to try to build our way to heaven through our human skills, our human gifts. So liberalism is built on the superstructure of Christianity. And again, it comes back to what?
No, go ahead.
It comes back to the separation of church and state and being a self-deception. That they're saying we're building on the superstructure of Christianity, but actually it's not the superstructure of Christianity. This is something we discovered and we put it there. But they're not the ones who discovered it. It was already there. They started building on a foundation that already existed, and then retroactively tried to convince themselves that they built a foundation.
I thought that this would be pertinent, and it went into it. So I'm just going to read it real quick before you do your blurb here. But there's too much overlap to stop myself. But it's it's from chapter 4. A reactionary guide to world peace or something along the line. Anyway, it's from the Moldbug era, but it was basically him kind of talking about how the Pax Americana thing isn't working out. And, as someone who, read such and such in The Economist ever since, he was a child, he doesn't see things getting any better. I'll start quoting now. This to me spells entropy. What peace we have is mostly stable. but it is not perfectly stable. Whatever disorder it has seems good at escalating itself. Since as a good citizen, you are familiar with the theory of global warming, you are familiar with what is needed to take slowly rising curves and project them into the late 21st century. Citizen, if I share your concern for the gaseous composition of the atmosphere, can you please share my concern for the breakdown of the thin membrane that distinguishes our world? From Jimmy Cliffs. Mango season, bad this year. That's pretty funny. He's so fucking funny sometimes. So our theory of peace is a little different. This is where it starts to kind of touch on what you were talking about. It is reactionary rather than progressive, which means that it is designed to work with hominids not as they should be, angels without wings, but as they are, bipedal land apes. Progressive thinkers throughout history differ widely on the means by which said land apes can be converted into angels, philosophers, or ideally angelic philosophers, much as no two alchemists agree on how to synthesize gold. For instance, Kant, taking the popular null hypothesis or sugar pill strategy, roots his claim in the inherent peaceability of Republican government in the following logic. So he starts to get into more detail there, but the idea of kind of turning people into this ideal has a little bit of overlap of what you were just talking
Yeah,
about there. But I love that quote or that section.
that's that. What was that from again?
Good question. Let me go up to the top here with this title. It's chapter 4 of Patchwork, so it's the same
Okay.
series.
Okay. Perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah. This for those of you who have never read Moldbug, who have never read Patch, or even for those of you who have read Moldbug but have never read Patchwork, it will really rearrange your view of the world. At least it did for Stephen and I, and for others that I've talked to about it. It very much. One thing about neo-reactionary thought is that a lot of it is very, very obvious. A lot of it is very once you it's like when you're not looking at it, you don't see it, but as soon as you look at it, you realize that it was sitting there the whole time. And it's a very simple, obvious truth. That's almost it's almost so simple that it's childlike, kind of. And you realize how simple people are, that people aren't nearly as complex as we like to think we are. This is why I think that what Jason Stapleton's doing with his work on influence and communication is just so powerful, because when you realize how simple humans are, that humans are very much we're very emotional, firstly emotional, secondly rational beings who make decisions very emotionally, and we're mimetic beings that that form our world by mimicking what we see around us. We don't exist without context. We're born into context. And that context like lies in the background and we don't realize it's there. So it's easy for us to deceive ourselves into thinking that we're objective or that we're making decisions rationally when we never are. We're always we don't get to define our own context. We can never change the context into which we were born in. Now we can color it, we can change it by rearranging our life, by moving somewhere else, by marrying a different person, or getting different friends or whatever. You can change like the shade of your context, but you'll never completely uproot it from its origins. So for that reason, people who discover that fact or understand it, or even just there's people who just kind of understand it intuitively, they realize that humans can be very easily weaponized if you just appeal to them in just the right ways. If you fill their needs, they're like animals, that like the rat or something, where you go and you like ding a bell and you give him a little morsel of food. Then every time you come ding a bell, he'll come back and get that morsel of food. Or the what was his name? The psychologist Pavlov. Yeah. That Pavlovian instinct is an indicator of the program. I don't want to say programmability, but the influenceability of humans, how easily humans can be influenced. And then when you pair that with the man, I'm having a hard time thinking today. When you pair that with when you take a sugar pill, it's called a placebo. When you pair that with the placebo effect, you realize that you can do this to yourself. Other people do it to other people, but you can also do it to yourself. You can inform your own context, and you can change your own psyche through the decisions that you make and the stuff you surround yourself with. Humans really, really underestimate the power of their own brain. Like I was saying, I don't remember if I said it before we went live or after, but right now, like Jason went and got COVID and he was positive, and I was around him all weekend, and now my brain is trying to convince me that I'm sick. I don't think that I am, but my brain is trying to convince me that I
You
am.
can't think of placebo and Pavlov. That's why I
Right.
just put in the chat. I was like, 100% Matt has COVID,
Yeah.
or you're a magician.
Yeah.
You're just a wizard.
Yeah. I I fully believe that if I here I can just mute you, and then just
Oh,
wave. Oh, it's yeah, just wave when it's done. Um, I fully believe that I can uh, make myself sick by thinking that I'm sick. Your body is way more influenceable than you might think, and you don't live in an objective reality. Our reality is very subjective, and it's very much a product of the thoughts that we put in our minds. So this is where you can cross from religion and psychology into self help very easily. It's just kind of a natural transition. But yeah, I think that was kind of about all I had to say on that particular subject. Right here toward the end, I'll get Steven unmuted. I just wanted to give you guys a little teaser on the mold bugs patchwork. And in response to Zachary, who we were talking to this morning about monarchy, this kind of starts getting into an interesting justification for monarchy, or at least an explanation for why it can be an effective system of government. So this is in the first chapter of Moldbug's series called Patchwork, A Positive Vision. And let me find the right spot to start here. I probably should have done this before we went live, but we are nothing if not disorganized here at King Pilled.
and
Okay.
it's kind of funny if you read enough, especially during that time period. I think he refers almost interchangeably sometimes with FDR, almost as being a monarch, and just in terms of how he was able to consolidate power.
Yep.
So yeah, in terms of like, thinking like kings and queens and crowns and princes, which is all like all the fun imagery. I think it has to do with consolidating power among the fewest people possible and where it's most visible, as opposed to where it's pervasive through our society and you can't seem to hunt down power when everyone's denying it. So and then just to sort of set up, because I don't know what quote you're going to be reading, but I believe he is kind of describing just tiny little sovereignties with effectively that would have little monarchs everywhere, in much smaller units certainly than like the president of the United States.
Yes.
If the United States was going to be like the whole quilt maybe or whatever, but not even necessarily tied together geographically. So it's just it's more like just different units and distribution of power, more so than the like royal families exactly as you would be thinking of them, sort of through like you're saying, through the vision of your education, your educational background that you got brought up in, which was more than likely a progressive nightmare for most people, and sort of a cynical looking down your nose at monarchy. Because monarchies, they're not ancient by any means. You're talking like World War I, where there's still kings and queens that you're dealing with here. But yeah, that quote probably is a good thing to read now.
One thing that he talks about in other parts, where he compares crime rates under in I don't remember exactly what era, 1600, something like that, in London versus crime rates now, and it's like not even close. It's
2 orders of magnitude or something like that.
Yeah, it's wildly more violent now than back then, and that's the big mistake that libertarians make, is they only focus on one form of violence. They only talk about state violence. They don't They don't seem to have any interest in private violence. But either way, it's just violence. It's just people violating other people's property rights.
Right.
So
And ultimately, do you care who is? Oh, God damn you! Do you care who is violating the nap?
right,
As
right,
it
right.
pertains to your life. And I think there's a lot of like, well, fuck me, I suppose. I'll just, yep. I can't like talk over it by any chance, can I?
Not
I
really,
don't stand
no.
a fucking chance. Nope,
No,
not
I'll
even a
meet you.
little bit.
Oh, this is funny. I'll start reading this and then we'll get Stephen jumping back in. So, the term that he uses for the type of government he's recommending or he's conceiving of is a joint stock realm, and it's based on kind of like a corporate model, a corporate governance structure. So, he said, our great difficulty, though, is that history records nothing quite like a sovereign joint stock company. Perhaps the closest examples were the chartered companies of the classical era. But even a colonial chartered company was chartered by a sovereign, though it operated outside that sovereign's realm. So here, I'll get Stephen unmuted. So the chartered company was not the sovereign power in a given region because it derived its power from another sovereign power. So the chartered company was chartered by the king of Spain, or something, or king of England. So again, so ultimately there was a sovereign power. When you talk about the idea of limited government, whatever is limiting the government is the true sovereign power, and so sovereignty is ultimately conserved, and anything that is telling your king what to do is itself the king. Anyway, so I'll continue reading here. Rather, I think the best way to think of a realm or sovereign corporation is as a modified version of monarchy. A royal family is to an ordinary family business, as a patchwork realm is to an ordinary, non sovereign public corporation. Joint stock realms thus solve the primary historical problem of monarchical government, the vagaries of the biological process. In other words, they assure that the overall direction of the realm will always be both strong and responsible, at least responsible in a financial sense. So part of the problem with divine right, with monarchy that begins as divine right and then it follows from that as a bloodline, like bloodline monarchies. The problem with that is that eventually a king's going to have a dickhead for a son, and he's going to wind up as the king, and then the realm becomes unstable. So what he's describing is a different set of that, and that's what we'll read when we read the whole thing. So he said a joint stock realm simply cannot have anything comparable to a weak monarch of the classical era. Realms will certainly recruit their executives from the same talent pool large companies now draw from. How many Fortune? This is a little ironic here. So he wrote this in 2008. He said, how many Fortune 500 CEOs today are regularly bullied and led by coalitions of their nominal subordinates? As, for just one example, the French monarchy so often was. Zero is probably too easy an answer, but at least an approximation. So there's aspects of Moldbug's writing where you'll see that he makes predictions or he makes some analogy. Like, the guy's not perfect. He gets some stuff wrong. But I don't think the fact that CEOs now in this current culture get that they bend to popular will, I don't think that that's necessarily an argument against the patchwork system that he's describing, and we can get into that later. Note, however, that we are not considering anything like the watered down constitutional, i.e., again ceremonial, monarchies of the democratic period. If the joint stock realm is like a monarchy, it is like a true, absolute, or, most pejoratively, divine right monarchy. With all due respect, dear reader, the probability that you have a sound understanding of the case for a divine right monarchy is approximately the probability that a large white goat will fall out of my ass. This means you need to read the great English exponent of absolute government, Sir Robert Filmer, and his masterpiece, Patriarcha. Filmer was the baddest-assed reactionary who ever lived. Frankly, he makes Carlyle look like a liberal. Just the title of Patriarcha is cooler than Jesus Christ himself, and the contents don't even begin to disappoint. We launch almost immediately into hardcore Anglican theology. If Filmer isn't Winter Beach reading, I don't know who is. I mean, seriously, how do you justify divine right monarchy to an atheist? Is it anything like selling refrigerators to Eskimos? Since I am both an atheist and a believer in divine right monarchy, I'd better be able to square this circle. One of the major doctrinal thrusts of European Christianity, in all ages and phases of its career, and certainly even in the thinly disguised crypto-Christian Unitarianism that has become the religion of the world's ruling class, e.g., if you ever meet a moderate Muslim, he's really a Unitarian, is the quest to justify the political structure of the world. So, to read that again without the parenthetical, one of the major doctrinal thrusts of European Christianity in all ages and phases of its career, and certainly even in the thinly disguised crypto-Christian Unitarianism that has become the religion of the world's ruling class, one of the major doctrinal thrusts of European Christianity is the quest to justify the political structure of the world. What makes a king a king? Why should the king be the king? Why can't I be the king? Or at least my cousin Ricky? Do we even need a king? And so on. People have strong emotional feelings about these questions to this day. At least they have a strong emotional feeling about the last one. Do we even need a king? Not answering them is certainly not acceptable. This is a mistake that libertarians make. We can't go an episode without beating up on libertarians a few times.
Yay.
When libertarians are more obsessed with being right than being popular. And in the current world, you're never going to get your view of the world off the ground if it's unpopular, if people don't like it. So if people don't like the vision of the world that you're presenting to them, that's not their problem. That's your problem. So if the way that you're describing your ideal world is not appealing to people, it's up to you to figure out how to make it appealing. And just being right isn't good enough. Being right doesn't matter if you don't have the influence to change the world in a way that would correspond with your rightness. So you need two things. You need to be right, but you also need to be persuasive. And libertarians don't put nearly enough emphasis on the latter. Back to Moldbug. But Filmer, and the divine right monarchist in general, comes as close as possible to not answering. Moreover, his reasoning is impeccable for the orthodox. Now he's quoting Filmer. If it please God, for the correction of the prince or punishment of the people, to suffer princes to be removed and others to be placed in their rooms, either by the factions of the nobility or rebellion of the people, in all such cases the judgment of God, who hath power to give and to take away kingdoms, is most just. Yet the ministry of men who execute God's judgments without commission is sinful and damnable. God doth but use and turn men's unrighteous acts to the performance of his righteous decrees. End quote. Note that this is basically a 17th century way of saying shit happens. God being omnipotent, etc., if Dickweed over there is king, it's obviously because God wanted Dickweed to be king. And who are you to disagree with God? But an atheist, such as myself, has a simpler way of getting to the same result. Really, what Filmer is saying is, if you want stable government, accept the status quo as the verdict of history. Once again, if you want stable government, accept the status quo as the verdict of history. There is no reason at all to inquire as to why the Bourbons are the kings of France. The rule is arbitrary. Nevertheless, it is to the benefit of all that this arbitrary rule exists, because obedience to the rightful king is a scaling point of nonviolent agreement. Now, a scaling point is a concept that I don't really understand. It's a game theory idea introduced by an economist, an American economist named Thomas Schelling in his book, The Strategy of Conflict. And it's a way of cooperating without communicating. So people who can't communicate can cooperate by anticipating the other person's actions. So a scaling point, I'm quoting from Naval Ravikant's blog. He said it's about multiplayer games where people respond based on what they think the other person's response will be. So if you are acting in a given situation and your decision is going to be influenced by someone else's decision, but you don't have any way of communicating with that person, a scaling point is a way that two people who can't communicate can end up cooperating. So what Moldbug is saying here is that when obedience to the rightful, when you accept that the king is the king because the king is the king, and you just obey him, and everyone in society just obeys him just because he is who he is, you create a scaling point where people don't necessarily need to be able to communicate to still be able to cooperate. And mass cooperation is just another word for peace and stability. So the goal here, what we're doing is we're trying to engineer a system where we incentivize mass cooperation among people. Let me finish reading this here and then I have a thought to add there. He said, And better yet, there is no way for a political force to steer the outcome of succession. At least, nothing comparable to the role of the educational authorities in a democracy. In other words, to put it in patchwork terms, the relationship between realm and patch is his term for a given region that's under control of a realm. The relationship between realm and patch is no more and no less than a property right. A patch is a sovereign property, that is, one whose proprietor has no defender but itself. Nonetheless, in moral terms, we may ask, why does this realm hold that patch? And the answer, as it always is within any system of strong property rights, will be not because it deserves to, but because it does. Note that whatever the theology, Filmer's model of government captures the property right approach perfectly. And that's where I'll end it for that reading. But so that's, if you think about property, we like to kind of imbue property rights with this kind of like a divine nature. But really, that's kind of, property is just, this is my property because it is, and you accept that it's my property because we've agreed that if I say this is my property, then it's my property. Conflict arises when we have a disagreement about whose property is whose property. So, what he's describing is a system of government wherein the person who holds the property is accepted as the property holder because he's the one holding it. It's a picture of formalism. This is what formalism is. It's just making what is formal and having people just accept it because it is. Now, what I was going to say here is that when we get Moldbug on the show and we have a conversation with him, assuming we have a conversation with him, what
If
I
he's
want
that lucky.
what I want to ask him is, why then should we not just accept the American empire as our rulers? Just accept them and admonish other people to just accept them, that they rule because they do. And if they make a new ruling, if they change the law, accept it because they changed it. Why would we try to create a new system of government? Why not just accept the government that is? And I know part of what he's going to say is that is part of what he, with respect to our relationship to the American government, I know that he says just get along, just go along to get along. And that's a pragmatic point for him. It's like, don't give them a reason to crush you. Just keep your head down and just accept them as a constant and go on with your life. But then why, by doing this, by writing this blog itself, he's violating his own principle about the value of stability, or the value that the justification for divine right monarchy is that it creates stability because people simply accept the power for what it is, and he's undermining the power that is through his blogs. That's a question that I want to ask him. I want to see what he has to say about that. See if he could get it into 20 minutes or 40 minutes.
I'll take a stab at that.
Okay.
Where I think he's trying to put, like, it's just in terms of speaking things into existence. He's trying to put solutions out there so that they're already in the consciousness. Not that, we're going to say start a podcast that's dedicated to his ideas. No, I'm kidding. But just like getting the ideas out there so that they don't sound bananas, or as bananas to people. And so that when eventually, maybe in our lifetime, this system, falls apart. And I don't know if you read this, but I've been doing so much reading of this guy recently. I can't even remember like what is what. It might have been something more recent, like from Gray Mirror, but he was talking about how regimes built on lies, I'm going to hopefully not butcher it, don't win every time, but they will win most times. And like the fact that they win most times and not every time is the reason that they eventually fall. But it's not going to be anything that is done that causes them to fall. It's almost like yes, have faith, that the truth will win. It's just not going to win on the timeline that you would prefer more than likely. But it can't. Yeah, it can't last. It can't last forever because most things built on lies don't last forever. Nothing lasts forever anyway. But yeah, I think getting those ideas out there so that people can have some sort of, idea of how to organize, when when things eventually do fall apart. And there will be brave people who attempt to organize that way before things fall apart. And it does tie in with the idea that I think everyone's feeling that community is going to be a big answer, for what we're dealing with right now. And I know that as far as like people even trying to start actual communities in places where they're not going to be bothered, I think that the patchwork piece is really timely for people to look at, because it's maybe a more idyllic version of what some people are actually trying to do, but just putting those ideas out there so that they're spoken into existence and they're part of the consciousness for whenever that time comes. I'm guessing that's what my personal friend Curtis Yarvin would begin to say about that. But he'd probably reference a lot of different historical figures in periods of time and
and
talk
he would
about it for
talk
an
for a
hour and
really
a half.
long time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I think that's probably basically exactly what he would say. And I think that he wouldn't say that patchwork is that he has solved all the problems, that he's determined this is the perfect way that everything would work exactly like this and we just need to create it. Basically what he's done is he's kind of created a baseline for starting to think about governance in a different form. And he's treating it like it's an engineering problem. You know, you're solving this. You're trying to create a structure of incentives where the people who participate have an incentive to participate in a way that benefits everybody else who's also participating. That's not a moral problem. That's just an engineering problem. You just have to try to network the incentives in just the right way. And I don't think there's this conservative impulse to that we're going to create the perfect system and then it'll be like a clock that we wind up and then just set it down and let it run and it'll just be fine. I think that's an idea that we have to purge from our system. That there's never ever going to be the ideal system that just works how you've planned and implemented it. There's always it's going to have to change. So you need to be able to build into the model a way of adapting. And but then of course then maybe that increases like attack surface for people to try to pervert it. But so this is kind of an ongoing thing. So he's just created a baseline to start discussing how it could work, and then from there people can build on that and come up with different ideas. I know that the part that's the least, and this is you guys obviously if you haven't read it you won't know what he's talking about here, but this is the part that's the least realistic to me is also kind of the linchpin of it, which is like cryptographic keys for weapons for the security force or whatever. Like that's the kind of thing that I'm kind of like, okay, you know, I see where he's going with it. I think that that's directionally true, but there's so much attack surface within that idea for bad actors to get in. But really, what it
Right.
comes down to is that for a system like this to work, everyone who participates in it has to believe in it.
Mm-hmm.
And they have to accept it. And that goes back to the divine right monarchy thing, that people accept it because it is. So this is the
Mm-hmm.
system that's been created, and people accept it because this is the system that has been created. I was
Do
listening.
you or anyone in the comments have any insight into whatever the psychological predisposition is for a general respect for authority? Because I absolutely have that. And so I would also say I really don't like fucking being told what to do ever. But there is also a part of me that like appreciates the idea of people obeying authority. I can't. It's both. It's both things. You know what I mean?
It's
If someone
I
tells me
think
to do something, I want to do the opposite. But there's something like traditional in there. Traditional things resonate with me as well. So I guess I can appreciate the stability and I can appreciate the order. But I know
it,
that that's definitely psychologically a part of me.
I would say that it's not that you don't have a problem with authority. You probably have a problem with incompetent authority or with
Mm-hmm.
undeserving authority. When you see someone who's in authority, who deserves it, who you respect, and you think that they should
Mm-hmm.
be in authority, you probably don't have a problem with them.
Yeah, and well, I think people run into that, and this is an idea that gets explored too. But it's just that impulse of, well, I just don't like dumb rules. You're presuming that you are like omniscient enough to understand why those rules were in the first place. And you could follow a path where you get fucked up enough to find out the hard way of why those rules exist. It's a really interesting thing because I don't know. I'm not like a square by any means, but I'm like oddly traditional. You know, I haven't been able to figure that out. But like I do have that thing where it's just like, yes, you should comply with authority that is, because it is, man, even weirdly to a degree about like paying taxes. I don't know. And I hate taxes, but just like the idea of, you know, when people talk about like kind of like gaming the system or whatever, like that doesn't super turn me on the way it turns on some people, because it's like, you're really not playing by the rules. Like, we're all playing by the fucking rules here. Get with it. You know what I mean?
There's the thing that I was saying in our,
There.
I don't remember if it was our last episode or if I was talking about it with Buck, but the way that humans make decisions that Jason was talking about in his the influential communication and branding workshop, he talked about how humans approach risk asymmetrically. So people are more interested. Yeah, we talked about it because you told me about your gym where a guy gives $5,000 to the trainer, and if he doesn't reach a certain weight goal, he loses the $5,000, and that's far more motivating than being told, "Hey, if you reach this weight goal, you'll get $5,000." People are more inclined to go out of their way to avoid risk than they are to go out of their way to get a gain. And I think that there's a similar dynamic here where so for example, like with wearing masks in stores here in LA, I hate wearing them. I don't want to wear them. But I'm also not going to be the person that goes in there and like starts and like creates a scene, because I'm going to be like, you know, like some places they're super anal about like your nose has to be covered. You know, you can't even, you have to wear people come up and get on your case if you're not wearing it properly. I think it's retarded. Like I think that they're stupid. But I'm also not going to go pick a fight with them. I'm just going to do what they want, because it's not worth my time to try to win a symbolic battle. Because like worst case scenario, I get the cops called on me, and I wind up trending on the internet. And best case scenario, I get to shop one time for 20 minutes without a mask over my nose. Like I didn't gain that much, but I had the potential of risking a whole bunch. So I think in general, that there's this recognition of the power that you do and don't have. And if you don't have the power to really change a scenario all that much, then it's probably in your best interests to just go along with whatever the authority says, just for the sake of self-preservation. And if you're going to stick your finger in the eye of the authority, you'd better have put yourself in a position where either you don't care about what happens to you, or you've put yourself into a position where the risk isn't that great. You're able to avoid it somehow. And I think that a lot of the tax stuff, people that are trying to avoid paying taxes, I think that it's an expression of a poverty mindset where they're like, I'm going to do this like super risky thing to try to get out from underneath, a little bit of tax, relatively speaking, when I could just make more money and just game the game, make more money and make enough that you can hire someone to ensure that you pay as little tax as possible. I was just watching, I just saw a Dave Ramsey thing as I was scrolling through Facebook the other day, and I appreciate Dave Ramsey, but he was on his usual thing where he says something like, the average new car is $500 a month for over 5 years, and if you took that and you just bought a reliable used car and invested the difference in a good mutual fund over the course of your life, you make millions, or something like that. And I'm like, that's poverty. That's the poverty mindset to me. I don't want to get into the technicals of it, but I don't need to like break my back over $500 a month. I'm just going to go make $500 a month to pay for the car that I want, so that I can just get whatever new car I want, and I don't have to worry about it. Like, I don't have to worry about repairs, and I don't have to have it in the shop and build around, like whatever. I'll just make $500 a month, and then I'll make 500 more that I can put in the mutual fund. So this idea that you have to like try to protect what you have, and everything is scarce, and I think that preaches to your mind the opposite of abundance. So when you preach to your mind scarcity, it makes you it makes you kind of lock up, and you don't see opportunities in the world.
I would, yeah. I don't know exactly where I got this way of thinking, because like I didn't grow up very, I wouldn't say I grew up super well off at all. But I do know that like my immediate thought is, all right, what do I have to do to make enough money to be able to do X, Y, or Z? It's like an active thing. Like like if I saw like a camera, piece of equipment that I want, it's like, all right, what job could I like pay for this with this in like one job? Like what job is worth $3,500 that I could go do to justify having this? So it's always about getting to that level. And I got myself fucked up during this pandemic thing by trying to figure out like all the unemployment shit, which I still have been able to do. But like all the assistance and stuff like that. And I was like stressing out and calling these people every day. And of course you're dealing with bureaucracy and you're getting frustrated. And then I immediately I'm never ever like that. But I was like sort of depressed from, not really having a purpose or really being able to work or do what I had done for years. And this really the second that that I said, yeah, you know what, fuck it, I don't care. Everything changed. Everything changed. And it could have been timing, but like the world around me fucking changed. And I don't think it's zero part to do with divorcing myself of, trying to like chase nickels of unemployment. I focus on, okay, I just got to make money again. I got to figure out ways to do that. And everything changed. How I felt changed. The circumstances changed. And, I'm kind of making money again with my business, like not as much as I would like to, not as much as I was, but it was a noticeable just from 1 hour to the next, everything changed by doing that. And I think that mindset, I don't think everyone has that from talking to people. And I don't know, Jason probably
Most people
I
don't.
guess teach it. Jason could probably teach it, right? Like that's yeah.
That's a big part of what he talks about.
I did want to say that concept that he was talking about, and I think he has a line in there somewhere, like peace, like a big part of peace is effectively pretending that yesterday didn't happen. It's somewhere I think in Patchwork. I want to say, but I remember in about 2012 because I just found like I messaged someone about it like on Twitter or something like that. But I think it was about 2012. It was just like it was this as if the universe was winking at me. But like I walked by a group of kids and I saw it was like a black kid who was wearing like skinny jeans and skateboarding, and some white kid was like sitting around like freestyle rapping. Well, like someone was like beatboxing, and it was so just a little. I mean, it was just like modern day Norman Rockwell kind of a thing. And I just looked at it and I was just like, you know what? If everyone over 23, 25 stopped talking about race, I think racism, like as we experience it, might go away in a generation. Like everyone would have to shut the fuck up about it. But I'm at a certain age where like black dudes wearing skinny jeans. I know fashion changes, but like that wasn't the fucking thing. You know what I mean? I mean, used to be the fucking nuclear option for like fucking with people. If like black guy said that you had tight pants, it was just over. But like just to show kind of how the cultures, like they just didn't give a fuck. You know what I mean? And and they certainly didn't. If they're 12 or 14 or 16 or whatever, just like that they weren't at all interested in whatever political utility it would have for them. Like they were just kind of existing. And I realized it would be too much to ask of people, but it would basically be anybody at a certain age and older would just have to stop talking about what they were talking about with race, and just like give it to that generation and just let them roll with it. Go ahead, skateboard and skinny jeans, black kid. Go ahead, beatbox and white boy. You got it. You know what I mean?
Right. That's a in a way that's a product of the poison of liberalism because it makes we're all raised to believe, and we all teach each other and act like we have a say in the way the world is run. And the thing I said before about how the world, oh, I just lost my train of thought. How
We don't have a say over how the world.
oh yeah. I said that social media is the greatest thing about social media is it gives anyone a voice, and the worst thing about social media is it gives anyone a voice. And that's the thing with democracy too. That democracy makes everyone feel like your opinion matters, and the vast majority of people, your opinion doesn't matter. And if people realize that, like if we woke up tomorrow and just like you snapped your fingers and everyone whose opinion actually doesn't matter just had an acceptance of that, and they were just like, whatever, this is the world that I live in, and I'm just going to go about my day and just accept whatever's in front of me, then the world would suddenly would change for the better in a lot of ways by teaching people that they have that they get a say in the way that they're governed. It introduces a lie to their world, and it gets people it gets everyone thinking politically and stuff in a way that just ends in like what you're talking about. That yeah, I'm about tapped out here.
I love it. I think you did great. I think all the members of all the fans in the comments. I'm committed to the Colin Quinn thing where he calls people fans. Ironically, by the way, um,
I like our fans.
I
John
think
said,
I think all the fans would agree you did a great job, Matthew. If I
"Oh,
may
well,
call you
thank you,
Matthew.
thank you. Yeah, you may." John said, "Your eyes open when you stop being attached to outcomes," and that's a good way to end it. So thank you, folks, for tuning in. This has been another episode of King Pilled. I am the host. I'm Matthew. You can follow me on Twitter at Real King Pilled. That's the other host. He's Steven. You can follow him at Messina Inc. Please like this show and share it and subscribe to it. And we will be back here again on Monday at 12:30 Pacific. We'll stream again, and hopefully by then I'll have the stuff done to get this uploaded as an actual podcast, and so people who can't watch it on YouTube are able to watch it in another or listen to it in another way. But anyways, we will see you guys later.